Hello everyone, welcome back to the course of Introductions to General Linguistics. So in this video, I would like to talk about linguistics diversity. So in the end of this lessons or materials, you're expected to be able to explain the basic principles of the linguistics diversity and the reasons behind the linguistic diversity. Alright, let's talk about linguistic diversity in this context. Linguistic diversity in this context means when the language developed in any way across the times and place for a very long periods so that it creates new varieties. The very little examples that we can take a look at in our everyday life is that you know that you have your mother tongues, right? Mother tongue is that your first language that you mastered at home. It's like the language that you speak to your parents. And then people in the past in a particular community, then they have reproductions, they married, then they have a babies, and then it form a new communities, and they speak in the same language. But then they go far away for seeking for a fortune or finding a better life. That is why these people from one area spread to many areas. Alright, so we can see that the bigger examples is how actually the language can create a variety in many levels, and that variety later is also called as a new language. So let's take a look at the example in European languages. We have the word milk in Latin, Italian, Spanish, and French. So for Latin, milk is lacte, L-A-C-T-E. But in Italian, it's latta, L-A-T-T-A. And Spanish is leche, L-E-C-H-E. And also in French, it's light, L-A-I-T. So it's quite similar, right? It seems that it's coming from similar sounds. So people in the past and until now, especially those who investigate language, can try to do the initial and deep reconstructions of what is actually the original sounds of this, so that there are a lot of variety, lacte, latta, and etc. So they do this by using the sounds reconstructions. Another example is that German has the word Vater, V-A-T-E-R, and then Dutch has Vader, V-A-D-E-R, and English have father, F-A-T-H-E-R, the same as father that we know in our everyday life, your daddy. Okay, so that's actually the idea of the developments of language, that it can create new vocabularies that can be connected and can be known, especially about the proto or the past language of this. So the next question is that how are language formed? So language can be formed in many ways. Let's talk about the first idea about language divergence. Language divergence in this context is then when a lack of special interactions among speakers of a language breaks the language into dialects than the new languages. This happened when a particular community, for example, in Java, you know that Javanese has several accents. When it is in Surakarta, in Surabaya, in, for example, in northern coast of Java, and then southern area like Cilacap and etc. That's in the case of Java. But in the case of English, the interaction of the new dialects is that, you know, the dialects of the maybe northern parts of England, southern part of England, and etc. So language divergence will create new dialects. As opposed to language divergence, we have also the word language convergence. Language convergence in this context is that when people with a different language have consistent spatial interactions and their language collapse into one. It's quite rare, but it's possibly happen. For example, in a certain communities, there are, let's say, 4 major language speakers or language groups. But because of the intense interactions, it seems that they try to agree on certain words that they speak to denote something. Then they will have a new language that is only understood by that communities. So that convergence in this context means that there are maybe new language or one or some of the words coming from this language compositions forms into the new one. Now, when one people and another people try to understand each other and they can communicate, means that they are mutually intelligible. Mutually intelligible. Okay. However, the terms of mutual intelligibility cannot be measured. Like how far is mutual intelligibility between me and other communities, between me and other communities out there. And sometimes when there are, let's say, two languages are closer compared to one language to other language, we still cannot measure whether in reality people can understand each other. Okay, so that's what we call as how language are formed, through language divergence or language convergence. Okay, so the linguistic diversity is also highly influenced by the language diffusions. So how do the language diffuse? The first factor is because of the human interactions. Like 2,000 years ago, Han China Roman Empire spread the language over the past empire. Like for example, the Roman Empire spreads very far, and then there is also an interactions between, for example, people in Java, especially Majapahit kingdoms, that diffuse far away until the let's say northern parts of the Southeast Asia now, so that we know they are familiar with Champa kingdoms. Second factor is about the print distributions. Like the Gutenberg's movable type of printing press in 1452 helped to diffuse the standardize and stabilize the European languages. Because of the printing distributions or the printing machine's ability, there are a lot of books produced so that people can read and try to understand. And for a long time, it becomes a set of rules that they can agree with, that they can socialize to others. The third one is migrations. Like ancient and more recent migration from the 16th century to now make the language diffuse, so that we know the language of Spanish, Portuguese, English, and also French. Number 4 of the language diffusion factors is because of trade. Like in this context, we're familiar with how the British and also Dutch colonized southern parts and also Southeast Asian parts of Asia. And in this context, now the migrations makes Indian people can also speak English with Indian accents. The language also diffuses through several ways. For example, trade. So in trading, like particular communities sell their commodity to other parts of the world. Like like British traders come to Indonesia, finding the spices, and after that going back to Europe, and then Dutch, Portuguese, Spanish also do the same. Or in Indonesia also, there are a lot of Indians and also Arabic traders come to Indonesia and to introduce the language. Then there are new language then that is absorbed by those traders. So the significant influence of traders makes new language are absorbed, or we know this as an assimilations of the language. Yeah. The next factors of the language diffusions is the rise of the nation's states. So in this context, when there is a new state's independence, then they will decide what language they would like to use. And then it is usually influenced by who colonized or which country colonized that particular new country. So that later there will be new stabilized and standardized language that they have. So it can be the language coming from the colonizers, or it can be for the mutual agreements of the society. So in this context, for example, like Indonesia decided to use Indonesian language, not, for example, Japanese, not from British or Dutch, but Indonesia selected Indonesian languages coming from Malay language. So it's different in the context of Singapore. They use English because Singaporean was colonized by the British colony at the time. So it's related to actually the next part, which is the colonizations or colonialisms is not only happens to Asia, but also to Africa and also America. So you know that like British Virgin Islands, American Virgin Islands, and etc. Like the South Africa is also influenced by British. That is why most people can speak English in South Africa. Alright, when we talk about the nations and certain big community, which there should be terminology, what we call as lingua franca. So lingua franca in this context is language is used among speakers from different languages for the purpose of trade or commerce, or it can be more than that. Like the lingua franca of Bahasa Indonesia or Indonesian language that is spoken by Javanese, people from Batak, Papua, Bali, and etc. But we also, later in social linguistics, you'd be familiar with this, there is a pidgin language. That is a language created when people combine parts or two or more language into simplified structures and vocabulary. And then when pidgins is actually stable and standardized and used by people for quite a long time, it becomes Creole language. Okay, when we talk about certain language for bigger and bigger community, then you will see that states can be seen or can be classified into several divisions based on the language spoken. For example, number one is monolingual state. There is a country which only speak one language. There is also multilingual state. There is a country in which more than one language is in use. Okay, so they're monolingual versus multilingual. Indonesia, multilingual. What about the United States? Monolingual or multilingual? Some of them still use Spanish. Some of them still use Chinese, but it's rarely used. Mostly they use English. All right. So when they have, when a country consists of lots of language, they have to choose what language are selected to be the official language. So official language here serve the purpose for public communication, like for tradings, like for example, a language for the governments, and also in other governmental settings. All right, so that's all the basic concepts of the language diffusions and also the characteristic of language diversity. So you also be familiar with the concept of accents and also dialects and then subdialects. So both of them are in the form of the variations. So when a country has the official language or standard language, then usually the standard one then develops and it creates a new dialects. That dialects, it can be based on regional factors. That's why dialects A is spoken, for example, for western parts, dialect B is the central parts, and then dialect C is in the eastern parts. Then within the dialects, there is also an accents focusing on the variety of language only in the sounds differences. Alright? So this is the end of the discussions about linguistics diversity. We will see you in another occasions to talk more about the language of the world. So see you in other sections of introductions to general linguistics. Bye bye.